Yes, we are back with dumpling school. I'm sorry it's taking so long to get back to this, but I guess I do things on this channel because I like to do them. You know, I make dumplings for a while because I like making dumplings, but then after a while I get a bit sick of it, so we stop making them. If I make ramen for a while, I get a bit sick of that, so I go on to something else. But we are now back. We are making some dumplings, and because you guys asked for a lot of vegetarian dumplings, that is what we're starting with. Some wholemeal vegetarian pot stickers. First things first, I've got my ingredients here. Let's just go through those. Some spring onions, some garlic chives, carrot, some dried shiitake mushrooms. These are still dry. I've just rinsed them to take off some of, I guess, the dirt from the outside. Some wood ear fungus, some black fungus here. And with these mushrooms and fungus, I'll just pour some hot water over the top to reconstitute them. And I'll just throw a lid on these mushrooms just to keep them under the water. Now, these might not look like the ingredients you might think go into a vegetarian dumpling. You know, there's not a lot of cabbage, there's no tofu, that kind of thing. It's kind of a philosophical difference. When you're making a vegetarian dumpling, a lot of people try to add cabbage and things or tofu to give it body. But it's not really about that. You know, in a meat dumpling, the meat gives it texture and taste, and the vegetables are there to kind of soften the meat a little bit, give a bit of texture and taste as well. But with a vegetarian dumpling, you've got to find other sources of texture and taste. So things like cabbage, I don't really put in a vegetarian dumpling because it requires an awful lot of seasoning to get it to taste really good. I mean, cabbage is a nice vegetable, but it doesn't have as much flavor as a carrot or some spring onions or garlic chives. You know, our meatiness, our umami-ness is coming from the mushrooms. The woodier fungus is giving almost a crunchy texture to it. So all of these ingredients are chosen for texture and taste. We're not trying to bulk up the filling of a dumpling here. We're just trying to put as much taste and flavor into it as possible. So don't bother with fillers, you know, cabbage, tofu, that kind of thing. Leave those out. You just end up having kind of a bland dumpling and focus on things that have a lot more flavor. So we'll chop these up into our dumpling filling sized pieces. Now for the woodier fungus, I just want to cut out this kind of firm part here and leave kind of the fleshy part there, which has a better texture. I just want to julienne that, I guess, cut into some thin strips. It's really there for texture, so if you don't have this, you could leave it out. You could substitute water chestnuts, something like that. It's just a bit of crunch to this dumpling. Our filling ingredients are cut. Now, I didn't throw away the shiitake mushroom stock, and I've got this pot here for a very particular reason. Now, you could easily make your dumpling skins from just hot water and wholemeal flour, the way that I was showing you how to make before. But I'm actually going to use the shiitake steeping liquid, which has a really lovely umami taste to it, to make the dumpling skins. There's a few little bits and pieces at the bottom, but they're fine. It's not dirt because we've already rinsed the shiitake mushrooms before we soaked them and colored them. So we'll put all of this steeping liquid into the pot and bring that back up to the boil on the stove. So we're making wholemeal dumpling skins. So I've got 2 cups of wholemeal flour here. The standard ratio for a hot water dough is roughly, and I say roughly, 2 times the volume of flour to the volume of liquid. And that can vary a lot, you know, in the type of flour you're using, the humidity, things like that. So with our 2 cups of wholemeal flour here, I'm gonna take 1 cup of our shiitake steeping liquid, and I won't add it all at once. You know, I'll throw the flour into the mixer. Without a mixer, you just do this by hand. And I'll probably add half the liquid first, about half a cup going in there. I'll get that started on the mixer. Okay, it's starting to come together, but it still needs a bit more liquid. I just don't want to overdo it, because if it gets too wet, I mean, you can always add more flour in, that's not a problem, but it just makes it a little bit hard to handle. So about 3/4 of a cup has gone in there, and we'll see if that's enough to bring the skins together. Okay, so after about 10 minutes of kneading, our dough looks pretty good. Just give it a touch more flour, just to stop the outside from sticking. Give it a couple of little kneads by hand, just to make sure we're on the right track and it looks right. And there, it's a nice smooth dough, so that's what I'm really looking for. So I want to cover that. I'll put that aside for about half an hour while we make the filling. So the filling for these dumplings is actually quite simple, but because it's a vegetarian filling, we're going to make it a cooked filling, because vegetables contain a lot of liquid that aren't going to be caught up in the protein net that we would if we were making meat dumplings. Go back and watch the first dumpling video if you're kind of confused by what I'm talking about. But essentially, the liquid that gets let out by meat when you're cooking gets caught in a protein net, and that gives you a moist dumpling. There's less protein in the vegetables, so the liquid that gets released by the vegetables in cooking, if we were to just stuff raw vegetables into a dumpling filling, would actually make the dumpling very, very soft. It would soften the inside of the dumpling and probably fall apart. So we need to cook it first to drive off some of the moisture, also to intensify the flavor of these vegetables a bit. So it's a pretty easy stir-frying procedure. I'm gonna mix all of these things together in the wok, starting with the onions and the carrots. Then the mushrooms and fungus. These garlic chives as well. Now to season it, plenty of salt, white pepper, some of the shaoxing wine. And when you're adding shaoxing wine to a wok, you want to add it against the metal of the wok. You don't want to pour it directly onto the ingredients. So just tip the wok to the side, pour it onto the metal, and that stops it from being absorbed too much by the ingredients too quickly. It also, they say, burns off a little bit more of the alcohol, but it's not really true. Soy sauce, again, you could add MSG or fish sauce to this if you wanted to, but I'm going to keep it completely vegetarian or vegan. And then some sesame oil, mainly for that nuttiness, that savory and kind of toasty taste of sesame oil. And that's our dumpling filling. Now I'll let this dumpling filling cool completely, and we'll get ready to fold our Potstickers. Our filling is cooled down completely, and it's quite a nice texture. Not too loose, not too sticky. Our dumpling skins look good too. Bit of flour on the board here to start cutting and rolling that. Now, I feel before I start making these dumplings, we should talk about, I guess, the theory behind them. Why have I used wholemeal flour? Not just because I think it's healthier or anything, but because when you're making dumplings like this, or any dumplings, I should say, you want to have a marriage between the filling and the texture of the wrapper. So in this case, our filling doesn't have a lot of texture because there's no meat in there. It's not going to be bitey to it. So wholemeal flour is going to give it a bit more of, I guess, body. Plus it's got a nice flavor to it as well. And because we don't have the additional, I guess, taste, that umami-ness, the savoriness of meat in there, we've chosen a lot of very flavorful vegetables to go in here. And then we're adding to that the flavor of, I guess, the whole grains, you know, the husk of the wheat is actually going to be quite a nice flavor. On top of that, I'm going to cook these a little bit differently because just boiling it isn't going to be ideal. I'm going to roll these probably a little bit thicker than I would for a normal, very fine dumpling. And we're going to make Potstickers. So we're going to pan fry them and steam them at the same time. That's going to give us more texture from that crispy base to make up for the lack of texture, I guess, lack of meatiness in the filling and with a slightly thicker dumpling tin, the overall experience should be a lovely textured dumpling, even though the filling's not kind of that springy, meaty filling we're used to. This is all just ways to, I guess, adapt a recipe to vegetarian sensibilities, but also still get a textured result. Now, I'm not going to take you through this whole rolling procedure and everything again. If you do want to know more about this, go up to the other video on how to make the basic jazzo. That'll go through why we've rolled into a sausage, why we've cut it, why we're pushing it down on the end, why I'm rolling like this. You know, the basics. So that is our first batch of pot stickers. I'll show you how we cook them. Pot stickers get their name because there is kind of a risk of them sticking to the pot. I always use a good carbon steel fry pan, but you can also use a non-stick fry pan for these as well. If you run into stainless steel and things like that, they can be a bit testy, but seasoned carbon steel I think is the best for this. Get the pan nice and hot first, good amount of oil. We're going to put our dumplings in with the flat side down. Now I've got some hot water going just over here in a pot. And when these pot stickers are just like this, just lightly golden brown on the bottom, I'll pour water in about 1 centimeter up the side of the pot stickers. Put the lid straight on. Turn the heat down to medium, and we'll let that go for about 6-7 minutes. After 6 or 7 minutes, I'll take the lid off, and we'll let that rest of that remaining liquid just evaporate. And when that water evaporates, the dumplings that were crispy on the bottom that went soggy when I put the water in will become crispy again. So we're just going to keep watching it because we don't want it to burn. When the water's done, maybe leave it for another 40 seconds or so, and we'll take those off the heat. Serve these with a bit of aged dumpling sauce and our homemade chili oil, and check out the other recipes in Dumpling School if you want to see those. And these are our vegetarian pot stickers.